Speaker Mike Johnson. Now let's start to balance the budget. It can be done. The president's remarks come after a pretty dramatic display unfolded, of course, on the House floor. Would they or won't they vote? Republican leaders and Donald Trump even getting on the phone to whip up those GOP votes to pass the budget resolution. But the hard work, of course, now still really lies ahead. What happens next? Let's get out to the Hill where we find our congressional correspondent, Kilmeny Dukehart, tracking all of this. A lot of drama, but in the end, they got it done, Kilm.
Yeah, Bianca, this was a photo finish for House Republicans with their narrow majority. And as you mentioned, a huge victory for Speaker Johnson. You had 217 Republicans voting for this and 215 Democrats against. That is extremely narrow. And before the final gavel, Johnson had held the floor while he and President Trump worked to flip reluctant Republicans who had expressed concerns that the House proposal doesn't go far enough in tackling the deficit and would make serious cuts to Medicaid in order to renew those 2017 tax cuts. All right. Well, we do not have that soundbite from Speaker Johnson, but Republican Congressman Thomas Massie had joined all Democrats in rejecting this. We had heard from the House Democratic Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who said that the plan represents the largest Medicaid cut in American history and would hurt children and families. We heard similar sentiments in the upper chamber from the Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who said Republicans are ready to throw Americans off Medicaid and SNAP so that they can give massive tax cuts to billionaires. But even some Republicans have concerns about some of those federal cuts, feeling that it would upset their constituents, even though Trump has assured the GOP that Medicaid would not be on the chopping block. Now, the question is right now how to cut $1.5 trillion without touching either one of those programs. And that's really going to be the next big hurdle. So they've won the battle, Bianca, but they haven't won the war. The next step are going to be these negotiations between the Republican Senate Majority Leader John Thune and House Speaker Mike Johnson. Thune said late last night that he wanted to make some changes to the House version. And of course, it's going to need the agreement of some of these hardline conservatives in the House when this gets kicked back to the lower chamber. Bianca?
All right, Kim, when we say drama, it really was, they were going to do the vote. Then they said, wait. And about an hour goes by. Democrats were having a little bit of a meltdown, wanting to return to order. So Donald Trump, we're hearing, made some calls during that time. It seems like that was instrumental in clinching last night's victory and getting them to yeses, except for Massie, of course.
Yeah, Bianca, make no mistake, whether it was the speaker's race or whether it was getting this budget resolution across the finish line, I think a lot of people would say, a lot of analysts would say that this couldn't have been accomplished without the help of President Trump here. He was very key in working with Speaker Johnson to flip Republican Congresswoman Victoria Spartz, who, as we spoke about yesterday, was a no on this. Johnson had worked to convince Warren Davidson, Republican Congressman Warren Davidson, again, who had some questions about some of those discretionary spending cuts. But he's going to have to continue to be involved in this process because when it comes to those spending cuts, this is going to have to, again, go back to the House where you're going to have those hardline conservatives saying there's not enough cuts. And then we're likely to see President Trump get involved in the process again. So he's going to be very instrumental in getting this across to the finish line and quarterbacking it. Bianca?
Kilmeny Dukehart, never a dull moment these days. Thanks for that update. And of course, Speaker Johnson, a little bit of relief for him today after that passes. For more on the budget vote and also the cabinet meeting we just watched here, pleased to bring in economist John Jordan, who's also former naval intelligence and an overseer at Stanford's Hoover Institute. John, good afternoon. Great to see you today.
Good to be here, Bianca.
All right, this was, very tight. We knew it would be with a razor-thin lead in the House, but you also had the Senate saying, we've got our own version. So Thune's got, two bills. What do you think of Speaker Johnson being able to get the win here? Of course, there's a lot of work left to be done and not sure what the next steps will bode for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to get where he was. He had President Trump whip some votes at the end. Basically, what he has, he can only afford one defection, and that's what he had here, Congressman Massey from Kentucky. And he's got basically certain people from vulnerable districts that have a high percentage of people on Medicaid that are going to be very sensitive to Democrat attacks on Medicaid, even though that's not what Republicans are doing. They're not taking away benefits. So they need to bring them along. At the same time, there's a lot of people in and outside of the Freedom Caucus that are very, very concerned about America's debt problem. So marrying these two together in a bill that is kind of vague in its language to begin to unlock the reconciliation process. It was a big win for Speaker Johnson, but the big sledding is to come. And it's not really with the Senate so much. It's going to be inside the House caucus because those margins are so tight.
We'll be watching that. Someone else concerned about spending, of course, is Elon Musk. He was right there, not at the table, but adjacent during the cabinet meeting we just watched with Donald Trump. I'm looking also at an OBM memorandum, and there's a deadline, John, coming out from this administration saying March 13th, we need a plan to cut. I want to play a little bit of what Elon said in front of all the reporters as they gathered there about what Doge's mission truly is.
The overall goal here with the Doge team is to help address the enormous deficit. We simply cannot sustain as a country $2 trillion deficits. The interest rates, just the interest on the national debt, now exceeds the Defense Department spending. We spend a lot on the Defense Department, but we're spending like over $1 trillion on interest. If this continues, the country will become de facto bankrupt. It's not an optional thing, it is an essential thing. That's the reason I'm here. And taking a lot of flack, and getting a lot of death threats, by the way. I mean, I'd like to stack them up, you know. But if we don't do this, America will go bankrupt. That's why it has to be done.
He did put on a lot of praise for the cabinet members in the room. How do you think this is going with the messaging of Doge and with the work that is being done, seeing, of course, the left meltdown?
Well, there's three things to look at here. First of all, actual poll numbers on how Doge is being received by the American people. And we've seen in several surveys now that clear majorities of the American public support what President Trump is doing, including with Doge. Elon Musk has been vilified as an individual because that's what the left does. If they don't like an idea, they try to attack an individual to make what he is doing toxic. There's been some success with that with Elon Musk. But at the end of the day, he's getting this done. And he points out there's a $2 trillion deficit. This has to get done. Ultimately, what Elon Musk is almost tech support for President Trump. He helps identify where these bits of waste and fraud are.
Said, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's up to the departments, the secretaries to do it, and then it has to be codified by federal spending with Congress.
And, you know, OBM is putting out a March 14th deadline, 13th deadline. There's another deadline, John, and as an economist, you know, let's talk about tariffs. He says they're going forward April the 2nd. We've obviously seen some strong talk potentially towards Canada. Donald Trump pretty clear right in that cabinet meeting talking about what they don't need from Canada. I'll play a little bit more what he said just moments ago about the tariffs and his vision of how they will proceed and what they will do.
We've been taken advantage of as a country for a long period of time. We've been tariffed, but we didn't tariff. Now, I did when I was here. We took in $700 billion from China. $700 billion. Not one president in the history of our country took in 10 cents from China. At the same time, China respected us. Now, when COVID came in, that was a different deal. I used to call it the China virus. I guess I can call it the China virus again, but you know, it's an accurate term, but I won't do that out of respect to China.
And we saw Apple, Tim Cook, moving jobs here to America, moving away from China. Obviously, there's a lot of questions about how much American jobs will be boosted by this, manufacturing. And so far, it seems like Donald Trump is playing it exactly the way it needs to be played to help us here at home, John. Your take?
Yeah, I mean, this is about reshoring American industry. First of all, we need those jobs here, and we can't be vulnerable like we were during COVID, especially emergencies like that, for pharmaceuticals, medical supplies, or so many other things. We need to be able to make these things here at home. As for tariffs, for example, Bianca, America charges 2.7% on average tariffs if you add it up, but America is charged 6.1% by everybody else, the rest of the world. We run almost $1 trillion a year in trade deficits. And that doesn't even capture it all, because you have a lot of countries like Canada, for instance, that have quotas on the quantities of certain American products that can come into the country that don't even count as tariffs, but are effectively barriers to trade. And that we're all for free trade, but free trade has to be fair trade. Otherwise, it's just the American economic engine subsidizing other countries' government spending.